Morning, everybody. Humans are complicated. Obviously, a lot of things would be easier to understand if we were straightforward and simple. There are a number of human attributes that we like to think are universally bad. And if only we could get rid of them, life would be easier. You know, quit cold turkey like an alcoholic who keeps a cold house and staying away from his hard drinking buddies. But instead, we're more like someone with a food addiction. The problem with quitting food is that you need food. So we have to keep dealing with it, and we have to keep it in our lives. But there's some fuzzy line that we cross where food stops being our friend and starts to hurt us. Panic. Now, there would be a great example. It's easy to think of panic as a consistently bad thing because panic is often the death of people, where we look at it and we readily see that they would have made it through if they could have just kept a cool head. Yet, all mammals have a panic response, also all birds, marsupials, reptiles, amphibians, most fish, even some insects. Such a universal attribute must have a use, or time would have removed it, or God wouldn't have given it to so many of us. And on thoughtful review, it's obvious that the need for panic can be explained in one sentence. When rational action won't save you, it's time to panic. The problem with panic, of course, is that it's an inexact solution to an inexact problem. So most days, we're best off to hold it at bay. But some days, it becomes our one and only best buddy. The 7 deadly sins. There would be a whole list of attributes that we would be so much better off if we could just dump them. After all, they are called the 7 deadly sins. So it seems a good guess that the attributes behind the sins are universally bad. I mean, wouldn't we all be better off if no one was lazy? If we never had to face the wrath of others? Heck, our own hearts and minds would sit quieter if only we were never afflicted with longing to have other people's stuff. Yeah, that seems to make a lot of sense with the 7 deadly sins. Until we look at pride. In the modern world, we really like pride. We call it confidence, and we encourage our children to have lots of it. In fact, there doesn't seem to be any level of self-confidence that we're not willing to warp reality to keep it in our kids. And of course, self-confidence has value, both in personal well-being and the ability to accomplish things. And it's easy to understand how we got, as a culture, to the place where pride is promoted. For much of history, being prideful often meant not accepting your inferior position in a divinely determined stratified society. A woman is chastised for not accepting her place below her husband, a slave for even thinking that wanton abuse isn't right. A peasant may be hung for thinking he dare court a noble woman. So we make it a point to teach our kids that they are the equal to anyone. A point of view I agree with most vehemently. Although, in our breaking away from accepting ourselves as lower than others, perhaps we've lost sight of the dark side of pride. Seems like as a culture, we don't think there is a dark side of pride, even though it is the first of the deadly sins. It's asserted by some, and I'm mostly in this camp, that the other deadly sins are just specific examples of pride. That the difference between ambition and greed is pride. So what does it mean exactly to say that pride has crossed to the dark side? Self-confidence, good. Arrogance, bad. Self-respect, very good. Stand up for yourself, believe in yourself. Superiority, not so good. Love of self, good. If you can't love yourself, how do you love anyone else? Narcissism, really bad. Self-aware, good. Self-absorbed, still bad. In the old world, it became bad when a person started to think of themselves as the equal of their betters. But in the modern world, it's when a person starts to think of themselves as better than their equals, which is everyone. We humans do have a tendency to believe that if we're better than someone else, we get more. We deserve more. We get to do more. It's fair and right to take more. And I'm not talking about being able to buy more things than someone with less money. Rather, the belief that we inherently deserve more. More money, more respect, more protection, more anything we want. We don't need to earn any of these things. We're not subject to the same rules as the lower people. It becomes okay to break rules to get what we want and deserve. People like to quote an experiment that shows that vegans think of themselves as better than others and will cheat more in the experiment than non-vegans. A different group of people like to quote the same experiment to show that devout Christians will likewise cheat more. And those who protect the environment, bunch of cheaters there too. The reality is, this same experiment has been done with a wide variety of attributes. Here's how it works. First, they give people a questionnaire asking them several related leading questions about how they conduct their life, focused around a particular attribute that's generally considered a good thing. How good their diet is, or how devout of a Christian they are, or how much they give to others, or a long list of good things the researchers might pick from. And then they leave them alone with a game while they evaluate the responses. The subjects believe they are unmonitored and readily see that they can cheat at the game for some small reward. And the group of people who rated themselves as better at whatever good thing they were just asked about will cheat more than the people who rated themselves poorly. It isn't that people who pay their bills or are more careful drivers are more likely to cheat. It's that when someone has it in their mind that they're a better person, they feel like they deserve more and thus justify some amount of cheating in their mind. The questionnaire is simply a tool to put it in some people's minds that they're better than other people. Of course, like me, I'm sure that everyone here would not have cheated anyway. But the reality is that when people decide that they're better than others, this generally ends up bad for others. It can actually be deadly when it's an attribute of the powerful, which it often is. When you hear the phrase power corrupts, it's the tendency of power to convince people that they're better, more important, more deserving, that their superior status is a result of their superior self, and it exempts them from both written and unwritten laws. There's a scene in a movie about Moses. At one point, they're showing Pharaoh this massive stone statue, and he wants to see the whole thing. So rather than walk around it, or even be carried around it, they command the slaves to rotate it. So the whips come out and they're flogging the hundreds of slaves and they're pulling on the ropes and the rollers are being greased and people are falling under the wheels, and then the platform starts to collapse and the rocks are falling and slaves are being crushed under the falling rocks, and the Pharaoh decides it's taking too long and he becomes bored and wanders away, leaving unrecognized human carnage. This, of course, is the pinnacle of pride and the point of the scene. The whim of the Pharaoh is more important than the labor and suffering of thousands. It's almost funny how the sin of pride is used much more to admonish the lower classes than the ruling class, despite the twin powers of it being both pervasive and damaging in the ruling class. But that's what I'm going to do here today. Why? Because we are not the ruling class. And it's more important for us to understand how this applies to us, since it applies to everyone. Like all of the deadly sins, we're talking about a trait universally applied, or it wouldn't be on this list. Although the most powerful display the lesson in the most stark way, we do all drift that way when untethered. That's the reality with all of the deadly sins, because all of these tendencies have uses in our existence. So their continued existence in humans is required. But since they often overshoot, like panic, and they become damaging, particularly to the group at large, we need a little help in this form of societal pressure to keep them in reasonable check. In our modern American culture, we seem to have almost no social pressure on people to check their sense of self-worth. So it seems to be running a little rampant. We hear and read stories every day of people who accost others because they didn't make the world to the proper liking of someone's expectations. A car had a bumper on it, sticker on it that wasn't liked, or someone's too old and fat to be laying on the beach. Someone decides to shoot a drive-through employee for not putting enough salt on a burger, or drive their car into a crowd of people because they weren't given admittance to a club. It isn't just drunk fools anymore who stand on the corner hollering gross insults at anyone who disagrees with them. Our politicians, corporate leaders, journalists, teachers, religious leaders, pretty much every person with a Twitter account is constantly hurling personal and abusive insults willy-nilly in every direction, and thinking it's okay too. We seem to have lost any expectation of politeness. Being polite involves some amount of modesty. It requires granting respect to others, granting them equal status to yourself, something that seems to get lost in an excess of attention to one's own value. These are the wages of pride. This is what happens when we grow up being taught that self-confidence and self-value are more important than anything else. More important to give every kid a gold star, so as not to damage the self-confidence of the kids who didn't do well, than it is to recognize and reward accomplishment. In our rush to escape the stratification that says we're inherently lower than some other group, as a society, we seem to have lost track of the need to teach our kids and ourselves humility along with self-confidence. There's no humbleness to be gained through never losing, never failing, never watching someone else succeed where you do not. To be humble, one needs a willingness to understand. I mean, really understand, not just mouth the words, that I am not more valuable than others. I'm sure we've all known people in our lives who will readily cause us 10 minutes of trouble to save themselves too. The man throwing his clothes on the bathroom floor, walking on them, getting them wet, and leaving his wife to pick them up and clean them. The worker who always arrives 10 minutes late to every meeting, leaving 11 other people to sit there and waste that 10 minutes. The car who blocks the road during heavy traffic because the line at Starbucks stretches out past the parking lot. The attitude of take what you can seems dominant. There's no obligation to consider the effect my actions have on others, and certainly no obligation to at least sometimes give up a little personal advantage for the sake of those around me. If I have a legal right to stand in the grocery store line and ask the checker 20 questions about a brand of milk, then I don't need to consider any other reason why I might choose to forgo that right now just because there's 6 people in the line behind me. Or perhaps we know someone, an adult child who can't seem to move on with life, or a college graduate who can't seem to get a job, who we look at and we know the problem is that they're too full of themselves. They are better than the apartment they can afford. They are better than the jobs they are offered. They deserve more than they can supply for themselves, and so end up unable to move forward in their life, usually with someone else making up the difference. Hi, Mom. Entitled would be another pride word with the thumbs down. Entitled, by its very definition, implies that I do not need to think about it. I do not need to earn it. I don't have to give back for it. In fact, I don't even need to appreciate it. It is just mine by right. No one likes to face the reality that we don't actually deserve anything. We like to bandy about terms like rights, constitutional rights, human rights, God-given rights. Well, you can tell what rights are actually given by God because we all have them. And if God gave it to us, humans can't take it away. All those other rights are something we as a group choose to give each other. Rights only work when they are fairly and consistently applied. Should we start deciding to demand rights without giving rights, then rights degenerate into conflict. When we're too full of ourselves, it makes sense that I have the right to say anything I want, but I don't have to put up with anyone saying anything that makes me feel uncomfortable. When we feel entitled, we readily decide that others need to get out of our way so we can get what we want. Again, the wages of pride. I want to be clear. It's not wrong to be proud of who you are. Proud of being smart or beautiful, of your skin color or your ancestry, or proud of what you can do. Even being proud about being better at something than others. It's understanding that being a fast runner or a good chess player or a wickedly effective engineer only makes you a better runner, chess player, or engineer, not a better human. Even things like paying your own bills, taking care of others, donating to your cause, not wandering out in the street in front of traffic. Oh, now we just ran into the problem of pride being like panic or food. Driving in a safe manner and showing up on time for your appointments are good things. And people deserve some amount of social reward for doing so. It's right and useful for people to take care of themselves and others. People who are aware and make an effort to be a good citizen, neighbor, Christian, parent, have justification for thinking well of themselves for doing that. It's better for people to be good than it is for them to be bad. We, as a society, a nation, a group, we like people to be good. We need most people to be good in order for the group to function effectively. The main problem with pride is that it's bad for others. The main problem with greed is that it's bad for others. These things tend to be their own reward for the people who indulge in them. If we want people to go to the light side and give up some amount of personal gain in doing that, we need to give back some kind of reward. Praise, status, acceptance, approval. These are the tools we have as a culture to encourage people to function as a group. Some teachings about the sin of pride go so far as to condemn any kind of pride. You should not get a personal good feeling out of donating to the poor. It isn't about you. And therefore, people should not be praised or honored for humbly helping those around them. Personally, I don't agree with this concept. I believe there is a level of pride that we, as a culture, need to cultivate in people. We need to tell people they are good and let them feel good for doing the things that allow society to function, which includes people paddling their own boat and advancing their own lives. There's a sweet spot with pride where we can puff out our chest and feel good about ourselves and our accomplishments, where we, as a group, can and do give praise and status to people who are good members of the group, especially those who go above and beyond to advance the group as a whole. We seem to have one of those lateral thinking problems that pop up in the contemplation of God and what is good. We can and even should feel good about ourselves for the things we do and do, especially when we do them well. And we can and even should reward people who accomplish things and help others. Choosing oneself over others comes with its own reward. There needs to be rewards for helping the group also. Pride. For the group, it's acceptance, approval, praise, etc. Internally, it's feeling good about oneself for it. Pride. So as individuals, we need to cultivate and self-reward good pride while we diminish and self-chastise bad pride. Now, how do we tell the difference? It isn't exactly a binary. It's more a continuum, and figuring out just where the line is between serving your people and your community and your God and self-serving can be a little tricky. But here's a few rules of thumb. If you find that following the golden rule is just too much trouble, if you're not even stopping to think about how your actions affect others, you may need a little humbleness renewal. Pride definitely becomes a sin when you start feeling as if even thinking about other people's needs is too much trouble. Or if you find yourself cheating because you're such a deserving person, time for an internal check. It's actually never okay to take what is due someone else, no matter how good you've been or how bad you perceive them to be. Or if you find yourself annoyed every time someone else is in your way, even when our rules of rights say they get to be. If anger becomes an appropriate response to having to wait for someone to cross the road when you're late for an appointment and the light is green and what is that worthless deadbeat doing in my way anyway, might be time to recognize that you've decided that you're superior. No matter how valuable, special, perfect, unique of a person we feel like we are, and we are, always remember, never forget, we are still not better than others. Blessed be.
You'll be wonderful.
You're
Thank you very much. Yeah. Now, we get a couple of ushers up here. We'll have our offering. Do our offering prayer. Divine love through me blesses and multiplies all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. Thank you, Father, Mother, God. Keep it flowing.